Veronica stood frozen as the door to the conference room swung open, her heart skipping a beat. The man who walked in was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his demeanor commanding and deliberate. His presence was unnerving, and there was an air about him that instantly made Veronica feel on edge. She didn't recognize him, but something about the way he held himself screamed power, power that could either help or hinder her mission. The room, already filled with attorneys, advocates, and journalists, went silent the moment the man entered. It was as if everyone in the room instinctively knew that this was someone of importance. The journalists exchanged curious glances, whispering quietly to one another. The Civil Rights Division representatives appeared more guarded, a few of them subtly adjusting their posture as they tried to assess this new presence. The man walked toward the front of the room with measured steps, his gaze briefly meeting Veronica's. He didn't smile, didn't offer a handshake, but instead, he nodded once in acknowledgement. It was the kind of nod someone might give when they've already sized you up and decided how to handle you. "I apologize for the interruption," the man said, his voice deep and smooth, with an almost predatory calm. "My name is Charles Finley. I'm with the Department of Justice. I've been sent to oversee this case." Veronica's stomach tightened at the mention of the Department of Justice. She had expected support from this meeting, from the people in this room. But this was different. The Department of Justice, while ostensibly a force for upholding justice, had often been criticized for not doing enough when it came to issues of racial injustice. She knew that the presence of someone like Charles Finley could be both a blessing and a curse. She needed to be careful with him. The room was still, the silence thick as Finley made his way to the front of the room, standing by the table where the group had been seated. He didn't sit, instead, he rested his hand on the edge of the table, leaning slightly forward as he looked around the room. "I understand the significance of what we're discussing here today," he continued, his eyes sweeping over the group. "But I must make one thing clear, this case cannot be allowed to spiral out of control. We're not here for theatrics or media attention. We're here to find the facts, and we will follow the law, no matter where it leads." Veronica's pulse quickened as she realized what he was insinuating. He wasn't just here to help. He was here to control the narrative, to ensure that whatever came of this investigation stayed within certain boundaries. He was warning them that the Department of Justice would not tolerate any deviations from what they deemed appropriate for public consumption. "Mr. Finley," Veronica began, her voice steady but filled with an edge of defiance, "I appreciate your concern for keeping things contained. But the issue here isn't just about the law. It's about the people whose lives have been affected by systemic racism, people who have been treated as less than human by law enforcement and the justice system. This isn't just a legal issue, this is a human rights issue." Finley's lips curled into a smile, though it was far from warm. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked over his shoulder at the group behind him, then turned back to Veronica. His eyes bore into hers, as if trying to gauge her resolve. "I'm well aware of the human cost, Judge Williams," Finley said slowly, his tone dropping a fraction. "But you must understand, we're dealing with a complex system. One that needs to be handled delicately, if we're to make any real change. These types of cases, they can't be rushed. They require a more measured approach. And the last thing we need is for this to become another media circus." Veronica felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She wasn't about to let this man, who clearly had more experience in the political games of justice than she did, deter her from her mission. She knew that her words could make a difference, that this case could be a turning point, but it wouldn't be if Finley got his way. "This isn't about a circus, Mr. Finley," Veronica said, her voice now icy with determination. "This is about justice. Real justice. The kind of justice that hasn't been served for far too long. You may want to measure the situation, but people have been dying while you measure." A tense silence followed her words. The other people in the room were staring now, some with unease, others with intrigue. Finley didn't flinch. In fact, he seemed almost amused by her boldness. "I'm not here to play games, Judge," Finley said, his voice low but stern. "And neither should you." The air in the room crackled with tension. This wasn't a simple conversation anymore. This was the moment where Veronica had to make a choice. She could back down, play along with the Department of Justice's version of what this case should be. Or she could push back, risk it all, and make sure that the world heard her message. That this wasn't just another case to sweep under the rug. The room was still, heavy with the consequences of what had just been said. Everyone was watching Veronica, waiting for her response. She could feel the pressure, the weight of this moment bearing down on her. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything she had already gone through. Not after seeing Matthew's apology, after recognizing that change was possible if the right people fought for it. "I'm not backing down," she said quietly, but her voice carried like a slap across the room. "This case isn't about your protocols, Mr. Finley. This is about the reality of what black people experience every day. It's about the unjust system that lets officers like Matthews target people simply because of the color of their skin. And I won't stand by and let that be swept under the rug just because you think it's too messy for your department." Finley's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a spark of irritation, maybe even fear. He had underestimated her. He had thought that as a judge, she would simply follow the orders, play by the rules. But Veronica had never been one to play by anyone's rules when they didn't serve the greater good. The other attorneys and advocates in the room shifted in their seats, their eyes flickering back and forth between Finley and Veronica. It was clear that there was a divide now. Some wanted to move forward cautiously, to appease the powers that be, while others knew that this was a fight that needed to be fought in the open. "Judge Williams," Finley said, his voice now tinged with something colder, more calculating. "I suggest you think carefully. This case could go very public, very fast. And once it does, there will be no going back. You'll be making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Are you sure you're prepared for that?" Veronica didn't flinch. She stood taller, her voice unwavering. "I've been making headlines for all the wrong reasons my whole life, Mr. Finley. But this time, I'm ready to make them for the right ones. I'm not backing down." As Veronica's words settled in the room, the tension became palpable. Everyone was waiting for Finley's next move, waiting for him to either back down or escalate the situation. The room was split, half were nodding in agreement with Veronica's resolve, while the others seemed to recoil at the thought of going public. Just as the air was thick with anticipation, Veronica's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message. She glanced down at her phone, her heart sinking when she read the words. "They're coming for you. Watch your back." The message was from an anonymous number, but it was enough to make Veronica's blood run cold. She had known that taking a stand would have consequences, but now it was clear, this was no longer just about the justice system. Someone out there was watching her. And they weren't going to let her take down the system without a fight. Veronica quickly slipped the phone back into her pocket, but the words weighed heavily on her. The moment she'd been preparing for, fighting against racial injustice and systemic bias, was only just beginning. The stakes had just been raised higher than she ever anticipated. And she wasn't sure how far she could go before they tried to silence her. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.